All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We're diving right back in today, picking up where we left off.
Yeah.
And we're really trying to pull back the curtain here,
Yeah.
get into some of those details, the kind of things you don't always see.
The specifics, right?
Yeah. We've got a stack of documents here, memos, personnel files, you name it, real agency history, and we're going to see what we can find. Really zeroing in on the most interesting stuff and thinking about, well, what it all might mean.
Exactly. It's all about taking those granular details, those little pieces, and seeing what kind of picture they start to paint.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. First up, we've got a William Harvey. A lot of documents on this guy, about 50, all focused on his cover.
Oh, wow.
And these cover a long time, too, like 1947 to 1967. So we're talking 20 years of documentation just on managing his cover.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, 50 documents just on one person's cover. What do you think that tells us right away?
Well, I think it points to a couple of things, right? First, you got to think, why so much secrecy? This wasn't some low-level guy, clearly. And second, why so long? 20 years, that's a serious commitment to keeping someone under wraps. Makes you wonder what kind of work he was doing, how often his identity had to change, that sort of thing.
Right, like how elaborate did they have to get?
Exactly.
Okay, then we have Alexander Rourke. And for him, it's like the opposite. The note here just says, no record in CCS.
CCS, that was their main filing system, right, for correspondence and all that.
Exactly.
So to have no record at all, that's really unusual.
It is. What do you make of that?
Well, it could be a few things. Maybe he was outside the normal employee structure somehow, a contractor maybe. Or it could be that his work was just so sensitive, they kept it completely off the books, really compartmentalized,
Yeah, so he's like a ghost almost.
Huh.
Okay. Then we've got Richard Helms, James Angleton, Raymond Rocca. Each has about 25 documents. Pretty similar stuff, cover travel orders, the usual administrative things.
Right, sounds pretty standard.
Yeah. But there are a few interesting bits. For Helms, who was around from 56 to 74, they mention his retirement processing.
Okay.
And for Angleton, who was there from 50 to 75, and Rocca from 64 to 75, they're both specifically labeled as staff employees. What do you think? Any significance to those details?
It's interesting. You've got this mix of the ordinary and the specific, right? All those administrative documents, that's just routine for high-level people. But then with Helms, it's like they're marking the end of his career there. And with Angleton and Rocca, that staff employee label, it seems simple, but you got to remember Rourke, right? No mention of any affiliation for him. So not saying it means anything specific, but it's definitely something to notice.
Yeah. And then there's this note about Helms, Angleton, and Rocca saying there are no records in CCS of correspondence or other communications on the matters identified. So we have the paperwork, but not the actual discussions about their cover or travel.
That's a good point. Where were those conversations happening then? It makes you wonder, If it wasn't in the main system, it had to be somewhere more controlled, more compartmentalized, maybe within their specific units or some special section with really high security.
Right, keeping it all on a need-to-know basis. Okay. Now we have another no record in CCS, and this time it's for the Southern Research Corporation. Like with Rourke, kind of makes you think about the nature of their relationship, doesn't it?
Definitely. You've got an external group, no trace of them in the central system. What does that tell you? Could be they were contractors, maybe involved in some really sensitive stuff, the kind they'd want to deny. Or maybe they worked through a totally different channel, bypassing the usual procedures. Whatever it was, that lack of a CCS record, it kind of screams arm's-length relationship, plausible deniability.
Interesting. All right, now we're going to see a big jump in the volume of documents. We're talking about the Wackenhut Corporation, 100 to 150 documents covering 63 to 77. And all these are specifically about contacts with Wackenhut officials. That's a lot of paperwork for just contacts.
It is, yeah. That many documents over that long a period, it tells you there was a pretty deep connection there. Now, knowing what we know about Wackenhut providing security services and all that, you might think they were guarding facilities, protecting personnel, right?
Right.
But honestly, with this many documents, it could be more than that. Maybe they were involved in cover support, logistics, even providing personnel for specific operations. Who knows? The point is, that relationship, it was definitely significant. Wackenhut was a key player for a long time.
So let's shift gears a bit here. We have these handwritten notes, and they're all about individuals and their employment or cover status. Feels way more personal than the other stuff we've been looking at.
Yeah, like behind-the-scenes stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a series of numbered entries, each one a little snapshot, like #1. Retired from CI staff in 1969, last known address unknown, then hashtag 2. Retired undercover from FI staff in 1972, last known address, this is from December 71, 3607 James Ridge Road, Cherry Chase, Maryland,
Okay.
2015. It's really interesting how they have so much detail on one and then nothing on the other.
Yeah, that's a good point. You see these little stories unfolding, and the details or lack of details, it tells a story too, right? Like with hashtag 1, last known address unknown, that's a whole other story. It's like they just vanished. Maybe they wanted to, maybe they had to. And the different designations, CI staff, FS staff, those probably refer to different branches, different kinds of operations.
Yeah. Then we have hashtag 3, state cover, DDoE and PD Civil Branch, NR.
DDO, that's the Deputy Directorate of Operations, right?
Yeah, the clandestine part of the CIA.
So this person's cover, their fake identity, was tied to some kind of state-level job, and that was linked directly to operations, specifically the ENPD Civil branch. I'm guessing that was some kind of assessment unit, maybe planning specific types of activities.
Right. Who knows exactly what they were doing, but it was definitely on the operational side of things. Okay, then hashtag 6, contract terminated in the field, Mexico City, February 28th, 1977. Mentions previous contract agent from November 51 to March 73 in Mexico City. Retired as independent contractor February 7th, 76.
Wow, there's a lot packed into that one. Mexico City, that seems to pop up a lot.
Yeah. What do you think about all that?
Well, you see this whole career playing out, don't you? A long-term contract, then it ends, and there's mention of someone else with an even longer history in Mexico City retiring as an independent contractor. Makes you wonder, were those connected somehow? Maybe different phases of the same operation, shifting from more hands-on to, I don't know, maybe an advisory role or something? And the fact that both were in Mexico City, that can't be a coincidence.
Yeah, like a hub for something. All right, hashtag 7. Retired from OTR in July 1975, open, no address shown. OTR, what do you think that refers to?
Not sure about the OTR. It could be some specific office or directorate, but the open, that probably refers to their cover status when they retired. In this case, it means they weren't retired undercover, so their real identity wasn't hidden anymore.
Makes sense. And no address shown, same as with hashtag 1, shows how hard it could be to track people down after they left, especially if they wanted to disappear.
Right. Okay, so we've got hashtag 8, retired understate cover from LA Division, December 31st, 77. Suggest LA Div be contacted. Last known address, 1244 Clear Ridge Road, Potomac, Maryland, 2854.
Okay, and then hashtag 10, state cover LA Division, and hashtag 11, still employed with the Caribbean branch state cover. It looks like state cover and the LA Division, those were linked pretty closely.
Yeah, looks that way. Using state-level jobs as cover seems like that was a common tactic in that division, probably operating in Latin America, right? And it's interesting, some people retired with known addresses, at least known to the division, while others, it's a mystery. Maybe different levels of contact after retirement, or maybe some were involved in more sensitive stuff and had to keep a lower profile.
Yeah, could be. Okay, let's see. Hashtag 14. No file open, and word reflects he was military detail in 1958 with FE Div located unknown.
No file. That's unusual.
Yeah.
Especially with the military detail-y part. And FE Div, that's probably Far East Division located unknown, too. That's like a ghost story right there.
It is. What do you think about that one?
Well, it's like they were operating outside the normal system, right? No file, military detail, maybe it was a temporary thing, super classified. They never even created a personnel file. Could have been for deniability or to keep things off the books completely. And then located unknown just adds to the mystery. It's like he disappeared off the map.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. Okay, so then we have hashtag 15, still employed contract employee undercover in Tokyo, and hashtag 16, still employed undercover as APO officer in Tokyo, APO, that's probably Army Post Office, using that address as part of their cover.
So we're seeing some live action here, people actively undercover in Tokyo. That was a major intelligence hub, especially back then. And the difference between contract employee and APO officer, that probably means different roles, different cover stories.
Right, interesting. Then hashtag 17, still employed as records admin officer in NetPlan staff open. And then hashtag 18, former contract employee wife of hashtag 17 above. It's kind of strange seeing those personal details pop up in these official records.
It is, yeah. But it's also kind of humanizing, right? Like, these weren't just names on a page. They had lives, families, connections. And it also shows how interconnected the agency community could be, with family members getting involved too. NetPlan staff, that's probably some regional or functional planning group within the agency, but who knows for sure.
Right. And then we've got the retirement details for hashtag 19 and hashtag 20 with addresses and dates, even some updates a few years after they retired. Seems like they kept tabs on some people more than others.
Yeah, definitely. Tracking people even after they left, updating addresses, that suggests they were still in some kind of contact, or maybe they were valuable enough to keep an eye on, just in case. The different levels of detail probably depend on the circumstances, their past work, that kind of thing.
All right, so now we have this note about personnel assigned to the Soviet section of Tokyo Station. It lists Tom Zumoto, retired in Japan, Tom Matsui, still employed by the station, Masaki Nagao, retired and living in California with a phone number even, and Kiyoshi Sasaki.
The Soviet section? Huh. That's pretty telling.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, it's pretty clear what their focus was, right? Targeting Soviet intelligence, that was been a top priority during the Cold War. And having retired and active personnel listed together, maybe that was some kind of internal directory, for keeping in touch, or maybe even an informal network for sharing information.
Yeah, could be. Okay, then there's this memo from 78 about a telephonic request for Roger Gabrielson. It says he's retired, but they have two different last known addresses for him, one in Belgium, one in New Mexico. Why do you think they were trying to track him down years after he retired?
Well, if they were still looking for him that late in the game, he must have been someone special. Maybe he had information, skills, something they thought was still valuable. And the two addresses, that's interesting. Could be a simple move, but it also makes you wonder if he was being deliberately hard to find. Maybe going to Belgium, that was about keeping a low profile. Or maybe he was still involved in something, just not officially.
Yeah, a lot of possibilities there. Okay, here's another memo from 78, this time about Tokyo Station, specifically the SR branch. They list George A. Phil, retired in Tokyo but now living in South Carolina, Robert M. Keith, also retired in Tokyo, now in Florida, and Hayami Sato, retired in Tokyo and living in Hawaii. So, more confirmation of a U.S. presence in Tokyo even after people retired.
Yeah, for sure. And they were keeping track of where these guys went, even after they left. That means they weren't just forgotten, Maybe they were still considered resources, or maybe there was a reason to keep an eye on them. Who knows?
All right, shifting gears again, we have this FBI report from 1960, and it's about Lazaro Eddie Espinoza Bonet, a Cuban refugee. The report says he's in a position to give reliable information, and they go into detail about his contacts, his activities, even asking about his English skills and whether he knows anything about letter bombs.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty intense stuff from 1960.
It is, yeah. This is like a snapshot of those early days, right after the Cuban Revolution. They were clearly focused on gathering intelligence, especially about anything anti-Castro, and the level of detail here, they mention his job in New Jersey, a meeting in the Bronx, specific names, even his nickname, La Osa. They were really digging deep. And the English part, that's interesting too. They wanted to make sure he could communicate effectively, I guess.
Yeah, it makes sense. They needed reliable information, and language was definitely a factor. Okay, fast forward to 1974. We've got a memo about agency witnesses who were supposed to testify before the Senate Select Committee. They list Mary Louise McGillen, Robert Ritchie, and Martin Lukoski, and the topics they were going to cover included James McCord's employment and knowledge, a TDY to Miami, and CIA relationships with certain companies.
Ah, so this is around the time of Watergate, right? Things were heating up for the agency then.
Yeah, they were definitely under scrutiny.
And the topics the committee was interested in, it's pretty clear what they were after. McCord and Watergate, that connection's obvious. Then the TDY to Miami, that's probably about covert operations in that area. And the relationships with companies, that's about money, front organizations, that kind of thing. They were digging into everything.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now we have something kind of different. This is from 78. And it's a request for an index search for anyone named Vanderbilt. And it lists all these different first names: William, Neil, Consuelo, Arthur, Enid, Alfred Gwynn. And there are dates and file numbers attached, going back decades. Why do you think they'd be looking for so many people with the same last name?
Well, it's a bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it? Maybe it was a family with lots of connections to the agency, different generations, different roles, who knows? Or maybe Vanderbilt was a code name, an alias, something like that. But whatever the reason, the fact that they were looking across such a long period, it means it wasn't just a one-off thing. Vanderbilt, that name had some significance for the agency.
Yeah, definitely. All right, this is a sensitive one. Secret messages from 73 about American black militants, specifically hijackers, living in Algeria. They list their names, even details about their wives and common-law wives. That's pretty heavy stuff.
It is. American hijackers in Algeria, that would have been a huge concern. And the detail they had on these guys, names, aliases, family connections, it shows how seriously they were taking it. And there was a rumor that the Algerian government was giving them travel documents. That would add a whole other layer of complexity to the situation. Not just a domestic issue anymore, but an international one.
Yeah, it's like something out of a spy novel.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to 1972. We've got this memo that's about two seemingly unrelated things. Ramparts Tours, which was a women's tour organized by the New York Media Workshop, and Jibinimum Training and Testing. That one involved covert assignment training for two people being sent overseas. It's really striking, the contrast between those two things.
Yeah, it's like two sides of the coin, right? You've got Ramparts Tours, sounds pretty straightforward, maybe some kind of public diplomacy thing, trying to gauge interest in a peace delegation. And then Jibinimum Training, that's straight up spy stuff, getting people ready for secret missions. Shows the range of activities the agency was involved in.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, 1967, we have a dispatch from Tokyo about 4 U.S. Navy deserters who were found aboard a Soviet ship, the Baikal. Apparently, Baharin, a Japanese anti-war group, helped them get there, and this whole thing caused a media frenzy.
Wow, that's like a perfect storm of Cold War anxieties and anti-war sentiment. U.S. Navy guys defecting to a Soviet ship with the help of Japanese activists. That's a huge symbolic event. And of course, the media jumped all over it. Had to have been a diplomatic nightmare.
Yeah, you can imagine the fallout from that. Okay, now we're getting into Project Liempty. This was about Ramon Joseph Alvarez, who was recruited to be part of the Soviet station's unilateral surveillance team. And there's information about Liempty base houses, which were used to photographically surveil the Soviet embassy. They had code names like Limited, La Lyric, La Cala, and the records show where they were and when they were active.
So this is classic Cold War espionage, right? Setting up surveillance operations, recruiting assets, all that. Pretty fascinating to see the details, like those code names for the base houses. It shows how organized and methodical they were, even in something as risky as spying on the Soviet embassy.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now we go back to 74 again. This memo is about an inquiry by someone named Ben Calling. He was asking about Jim McCord's involvement with Cuban activities. Calling talked to other people in OTS, the Office of Technical Service, which later became TSD, but they said they didn't remember McCord doing anything related to Cuba. What do you think about that?
Well, it could be a genuine dead end, you know? Maybe he was just mistaken. But with something like this, you always got to wonder if there's more to it. Maybe people were being intentionally vague, or maybe they just didn't know because of compartmentalization. That was a big thing, you know, keeping information on a need-to-know basis.
Right. Okay, so we've got a memo from 1962, and it's a request for the release of Contingency O-Plan 622, which was a plan for Cuba. They wanted specifics like the port of entry, airfield, even contact information for people at the landing and offloading points. That's pretty detailed planning.
Yeah, no kidding. This was during a really tense time, you know, with the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that. They were definitely thinking about what they might have to do, and they were planning for it in detail. That kind of contingency planning, it's a reminder of how high the stakes were back then.
Definitely. Okay, last one. This is a staff message from 78 about an individual code named BACH. He was revealing information about tradecraft and methods used at the Mexico City station, potentially causing damage to relationships and possibly more revelations to come. The memo even mentions BACH becoming a celebrity because of this.
Wow, so someone went rogue, huh? And in Mexico City, that's not good. That was a major station, a lot of sensitive operations going on there. Exposing their methods, that could have had a domino effect, compromising other stations, damaging relationships with allies, all kinds of problems.
Right, a real mess.
And the celebrity part, that's kind of chilling, you know? It means it wasn't just an internal thing, it went public. That's a real nightmare for an intelligence agency.
Yeah, talk about ending on a dramatic note.
Yeah.
So we've really covered a lot here today, looking at all these different documents. It's amazing what you can find when you dig into the details, isn't it?
It really is. You might think you need to read whole volumes to find something interesting, but that's not true. Sometimes those little specifics, those seemingly insignificant details, they can tell you more than a whole chapter.
Yeah, exactly. So for you, the listener, I hope this has been insightful. Think about what these details tell us, about the priorities, the methods, the challenges they faced back then. It's a window into a whole different world.
And it makes you wonder, right? Do these patterns, these specific cases we've talked about, do they have any relevance to what's happening today? Are there lessons we can learn from the past, from all these deep dives we do? Something to think about.
Definitely. All right, well, that's it for the deep dive today. Until next time, keep digging.
Keep digging.